details when they are called upon. We've got agenda item 1 to receive apologies for absence, and we're at a full committee here today, so I have the presumption that no apologies have been received, and therefore agenda item 2, name substitutes, as there are no substitutes. Agenda item 3, does any member wish to declare any interest in any agenda item? No, thank you. So then moving to agenda item 4, our minutes, and we're approving and signing the minutes of the meeting held on the 25th of July 2022, and further to minute 18, action 170, a document containing queries from myself and the responses of the Director of Resources and Assurance in relation to the 2021-22 draft statement of accounts is included as Appendix A in the minutes. The action log for the committee is also attached as Appendix B. Firstly, can I ask that, as no matters of accuracy have been notified from the running officer, are you content that I sign the minutes as an accurate record? Thank you. I'll sign those after the meeting. The committee's action log is attached to the minutes, pages 21 to 24, with printed copies provided in the meeting room. I'd take a few minutes now to go through that action log. If any members have any comments on any of the action numbers, shall we take them sheet by sheet? We've got 4 sheets here, I think. On sheet 1, are there any comments? Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just 2 on the sheet. Action 94, I just want to say yes, please. I would like to be included as one of the members incorporated in that briefing. And action 102 talks about the review of spreadsheet around section 106 is to be circulated to the committee shortly with a date yet to be confirmed. So just wondering if we are yet able to get a date. Thank you, Chair.
I'm assuming that the action sheet was updated for this meeting, so a date yet hasn't come forward.
That's correct, yes, and it was chased last week, but I'll obviously get an update to you.
Well, we've got another meeting at the. Andrew.
Well, Chair, I was going to say, my understanding is Justine Burnett, who's leading on the 106 front, has produced these information, but they've been circulated to all members. There's been a number of member briefings, and so I think they have been circulated, but probably the dots haven't been connected to join that to this action point. So I'll speak to Justine and we'll make sure that we circulate those links to the committee. So I think we can
to my memory as well, because I sat through the presentation and excellent it was, and I did comment on that to the Chief Exec. So that has in fact occurred. Councillor Bartlett.
Yes, just the same action 94 as Councillor Bolton asking who wanted to receive a briefing on the internal internal audit recommendations. And it might just be an idea if we do that by show of hands to see if anyone just wants to do that.
Yes, well, indeed, what I was going to propose was that perhaps an update is, or a briefing is arranged and circulated so that those of us that wish to attend can attend in a fashion, because it's likely to be more than one person. Has everybody got any interest in this? Yeah. So can we ask for that, please? Still on page 1. Councillor Jimmer.
Yeah, sorry, just a more general point. Many of these move on to October 22 or beyond, but mindful that we're heading towards May next year and elections and all the rest of it. Trying to get all of these things completed within that timescale seems to me to be, because you can see the number of times that crossings out saying the date's been moved on, the date's been moved on. Are we going to, do we need to actually have a bit of a rationalisation of this and decide those things that we actually do want to try and particularly see moved on against those that perhaps, shall we say, are desirable but not quite so necessary? I'm just conscious that I just don't see us getting all of this work done, and I'm very conscious of the amount of work that's already going on with regard to budget preparations and things like that. So I just want to touch a realism to see if this list is rather overly aspirational. I look to those on the other side to perhaps make comment.
My own thoughts are that, well, we won't, not all the actions will be complete by the time that this present committee will come to its sort of natural end in May. But in a way, the purpose of the list is to enable the new committee, whoever they might be, some of us might not, that will then pick up in the following year, at least have a track of actions going forward. It might be that we spend some time, perhaps, I don't know, in the March meeting or towards the end of our, just going through and deciding whether we're satisfied and we can accept some of these as complete, or that we suggest that some of them aren't. The time has moved on, and I think in the meeting before last, we decided that time had moved on, and one or two items had naturally dropped off the agenda to do with COVID, I think, because activity in the outside world marches on while we're looking at some of these. I don't have any officers on any comments. I'm hoping that officers find this just a useful reminder of items that should come up during the meeting that we think are important for to us to give assurance to council that things are in the minutiae being done as well as in the roundness of the full agenda items.
Joe, it is a helpful reminder on keeping track of these things because there's lots of threads to keep on top of. But Councillor Jim makes a valid point that in these sort of difficult times in terms of resources and choices to make about what we allocate, but there is a resource drag for dealing with some of these things.
But the fact that we put them and made them actions, I think, means that we've considered them at the time and thought they should be actions. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm just mindful that when you look at some of the crossings outs and it sort of says it was going to be due in 11/21 or September 21, etc. We know we've long gone past those dates. I think there's a rationalisation on how important were those, and perhaps we should be really pushing that some we might desire a little more input with limited resources in certain areas than others. I think it is a fair list, and I take your point completely. It is a list that is a reminder of what's needed. But on the other hand, if we don't achieve half of it, we're actually struggling.
Perhaps I could ask then committee members to review this list over the next few weeks, perhaps come back at the November meeting with any priorities that they think are, they would really like to see completed before the end of our term in sitting on committee. Is that reasonable? Thank you. Okay, page 2. That's a Bolton.
Yeah, sorry, I've got questions on that page. For comments and action 122, I suggest rather than date confirmed, we have it in line with the action 164 with the December 22 date, possibly please. And,
So
sorry,
we just examine that.
yep, sorry.
Pause and examine. So, 122 is new transformation director.
Yeah.
Um,
Action 164 says, the transformation strategy, delivery of the transformation strategy, and it was agreed to provide an update to all members on transformation strategy through the weekly members update in September and to follow up with a member briefing session before Christmas. And I think if we could have the members briefing, that may, because I guess our action was how the efficiencies following new transformation director to be invited to meet with the audit governance committee to discuss where and how efficiencies following internal audit processes are being applied to council working. Hopefully that can be addressed in the member briefing and it would clear up our action.
Yeah, so that's the Chief Executive's Office, and 122 was down to corporate services.
This is 164.
164 is
122.
Chief Executive's Office. Perhaps between them they could decide who owns a combined action.
And then hopefully we can rationalise our actions.
Thank you.
My other question was action 147, a workshop to consider the first iteration of the strategic risk register. We've got that down as November 22, but conscious that November 22 is just around the corner, so whether we can progress with defining an actual date. And that's all on this page for me, Chair, thank you.
Yeah, now the consideration of the risk register was delayed from the September meeting, I think. Could you just remind me when we are looking at it? Is that October 31st?
I believe so, yes,
Yeah.
it's scheduled at the moment, yes.
So perhaps if I could ask the clerk to speak to corporate services. I realise we've got 100 here, but about whether November is a likely timescale for that. It might be prudent if we're actually being presented with the up-to-date risk register at the end of October to have this actually quite soon after that, because at least it'll be fresh in my mind, if not in all our minds. But I appreciate that there might be, again, problems of resource. Page 3.
Yeah, just going back to action 164, as Alison flagged before. Just reading the action that has been taken on progress update. It refers to a meeting with the chairman and vice chairman to update the delivery of transformation strategy on the 7th of July. I believe I was vice chairman there, but I don't believe I was at that meeting. I'm fairly certain I wasn't at that meeting.
The meeting did take place on the 7th. It's from the correspondence line asking for a meeting on the 7th of July. I will. It did take place.
I think the meeting was before July.
It was, wasn't it?
Me.
Yeah.
When I was the vice chair, but at that point, so that must have been before me.
But I think we're really looking for an update on
Yeah.
what was updated that time.
Could we also, yes, clarify that?
Yeah.
And it's not my short-term memory.
Councillor Watson.
Thank you. So my question is around action 149 in relation to rethinking governance. I'm just conscious that with the rethinking governance was a member-led working group under this committee, and they have been disbanded because we had presented all the recommendations to full council, etc. But there are a number of elements that that operationally are still underway, and also I'm conscious that we had agreed to do a 12-month review, which then is beyond May. So I guess my question is, do we need to update this action to understand where we are at in terms of some of those operational elements that were still being undertaken? For example, the officers were going to work on an updated board plan. They were going to represent the constitution, so there are a number of actions that are still ongoing, and I'm not quite sure where officers are at on that. But also, we have no group to do this 12-month review, so do we need to add an action plan? So the next committee can pick that up to ensure that there is a 12-month review. I just don't want to have those things lost. So whether it's an update in the action, or whether we need to ask for an update report to come to committee, I'm not quite sure, Chair, what would be most appropriate. But I don't believe we are expecting a represented constitution in October 22, which is what the due date is.
It would be a surprise perhaps if we had a represented constitution by the end of this month. I think what might, just thinking what you're making, it might be useful if we expanded this action to include those items which were still outstanding when the sort of working party, I don't know whether the working party was officially wound up or it simply ceased to be on the delivery of its report to the Audit governance and thence to council. But there are a number of items still outstanding, and you're right in saying that we should record somewhere what they are, so that both this committee and any future committee can consider whether those actions should be delivered and when they should be delivered, and that officers are reminded that there are actions outstanding. Could I ask you to work with the clerk just to ensure that list is covered, and we'll put them into that action 149, and that'll mean we've captured them. Otherwise, you're right, they'll simply drift away, possibly in the midst of after an election, and then new committees are formed. Thank you for that. That means that we can then look at that as an action before in February or March as well, if things haven't been by then. Okay. Anything else on page 3? Case.
Yes,
Sorry, Councillor Jim.
thank you. Yeah, I noted in, let me find it again, 155, it's quite an interesting update in that there was a legal issue that if you take this right back to where it was when it was first put on here, which is May 22, that the contractors failed to provide the relevant invoices that are required in order to follow this whole thing through. It's got a due date July 22 at the end of it, but we are sitting in October as far as I'm aware. Therefore, sort of, whilst it's not for us to get into the nitty-gritty of some of these things, I appreciate it's an oversight committee, but one does look at that and go, hang on a second, what is going on there? If not getting the invoices from the contractor or not getting the material that's required, therefore not able to complete with government, and it's now in the hands of legal advice, and we haven't even got a due date on it. I'm just sort of questioning where that's going.
Andrew, I don't know if you can comment, and obviously an action for, it's down as an action for swap. So, but I suspect you've got as much interest in it as anybody else here.
Well, Madam Chairman, the issue, and as it says in the note, the work has been carried out, the contractor has presented and asked to be paid for it, and we've said, well, we're not going to pay you until you provide the evidence of that you've done the work, and we've reached a position where the contractor, for whatever reason, hasn't provided that. So we've said, well, we're not paying you. The deadline has now passed for that grant submission to be returned back to government, which has happened. So we're in, it's a dispute with the contractor. They've put a bill to us, we've said we're not paying until you provide the evidence. And they haven't, to date, to my understanding, provided that evidence. So we've had this sort of, the systems have worked, we've not paid a bill that was printed because we didn't have the supporting evidence. So we've said, no, we're not paying. It sits there in dispute.
Potentially they'll have 6 years to present their evidence, and we have an ongoing uncrystallised liability.
They have, but then as it says in here, we've informed the government department that we have this situation. So we've said that they return back to government of the grant. This element, there is still an ongoing contractual dispute, and we would expect the government department, if the contractor at some point provides the evidence, we will then say, okay, we will pay Baines, you need to give us the money. So we've reached that position of a standpoint with the contractor. We're not going to pay for something they can't evidence. We can't submit a claim to government for that because they can't provide the evidence. So it's one of those slightly bizarre situations.
But effectively then what you are saying is that the council is not at...
we don't carry residual risk on this.
We're not carrying residual risk. In which case, I suspect in terms of an action, it's one of your, that you highlighted actually, we could say, well, this is, you know, effectively it's been completed because from our consideration of risk or consideration, it is complete. It will either be finalised one way or the other. Either 6 years will pass or something will come forward from that contract.
Chair,
Yeah. Councillor Davis.
can I just ask how much money we're talking about?
I'd have to check, but it's tens of thousands of pounds.
And is this a big contractor? Not a little man who's now gone bust because he hasn't been paid?
I can confirm it's not a little man. They haven't gone bust.
Okay.
It's also not a massive company, but it's a mid-sized company. They knew what they were doing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Any other items on page 4? That's on page 4.
Yeah.
Oh, Councillor Jim.
Noted as I dashed out the door that I've just had an invitation to meet with the Director of Resources and Assurance, so 165. I see it is there, and we are working on that date, I believe.
To make a verb, Chris.
I might have actually confirmed that one. I'm just looking at diaries.
Excellent. I'm sure the clerk will update the action chapter for the end of the month. Thank you. Right. In which case we'll turn to agenda item 5, questions from members of the public. Sorry.
Could we also do the final from 168 to 175.
Sorry, I was on, I thought I'd asked for comments on page 4, but I haven't. By all means, comment away.
Thank you. Yes, sorry, I was following on from councillor Gilman
Ah,
last week. Yes, I do actually have, my first one is on action 168. Where it says at the end of the progress report on the on mandatory training, that we anticipate to have an update on Hoopal completion rates at the end of 2022, etc. But we have a completed date for the whole action for this as 23rd of September. And it strikes me that if we are still waiting for information on the update of the Hoopal completion rate, we haven't necessarily completed that action. And I'm just mindful of the fact that do we want to take that and let that action then fall off the action log, or do we still want to track Hoopal's training?
Thank you for that. Well, it's up to committee really. The comment in the progress update is that the inclusion of further updated figures will be within our annual fraud report, which comes to us in January 2023. I think that annual fraud report will include data on fraud awareness training in its entirety. So I suspect although the meeting date at which this report was delivered was 27th of June, we're looking at an annual fraud report. I haven't checked with our working working list whether that's due in January, but the suggestion here is that it's coming to us in January. Is that right?
There's the there's an annual update expected in January, yes, on the on anti-fraud program correction indeed. So certainly we can ask the officers specifically to include those figures in the update at that time. So subject to
what I'm in a roundabout way of saying is it's going to come to us as an agenda item. Therefore, we'll probably I can appreciate we don't necessarily need it as an action item. But if committee wants it to stay, I'm not ruling on it.
I'm mindful of Councillor Jim's mind shows that we want to be finishing actions rather than yeah. If there is a route for this, then I guess
I suppose the issue being we simply have to remember that we're expecting to see that figure in the report come January. Councillor Bolton.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And I think the main reason why it came onto our action plan is because training was listed as a control within the report, yet the numbers that had done the training at that point were not significant. And I think on the whole, although not 100%, I think they've gone a long way to where we were. So I would say that it's probably operating at an adequate level to be a control. So unless it's significantly wildly different in people, I would say that it's met our objective, and I would be recommending that it be closed.
Yep. Okay. Let's find that and yep.
Should I just have one last question? Me?
Yep.
And that's the final action 176, which has been updated. The update of the finance and contract procurement rules. It says that the progress is that it's been updated, and I'm just wondering if I could see the wording for that update, if that's possible.
Just, if I may, the contract procedure rules have been updated and included. We just need to get the finance procedure rules included and published. So I shouldn't have marked that as date. I was anticipating getting it done by last week. So that's still open. But as soon as we publish that, I'll send a link to members of the committee so that you've got a link to both sets and the exact spot on the constitution.
That'd be great, because the old one was in the original paper, so it'd be good to see.
Absolutely, and indeed, I understand that there'll be a communication to officers about the updated documents shortly as well.
Thank you.
Just then, relating to that was 175, which was swapped by the confirmation of this new paragraph in the financial procedure rules. Satisfied a related internal audit recommendation, so I'm presuming
That's also being chased up as well. Yes.
chased up. Okay, thank you. Agenda item 5, questions from members of the public. No questions have been received from the public on this occasion. Or under agenda item 6, is there any question received from councillors? So we'll move on to agenda item 7, the draft annual governance statement 21-22. Purpose is to seek review of committee as to whether the draft annual governance statement for 21-22 properly reflects the internal control environment council is operating in and the appropriateness of actions identified to improve. I've got down Rachel to present this. Our recommendation, suggested recommendation, will be to determine whether the draft annual governance statement properly reflects the risk environment the council is operating in, and the actions identified represent an appropriate response. We're looking at the draft at the moment, so there is an opportunity for the committee to comment and make recommendations or ask for actions to be taken on the draft statement as it exists. Rachel, did you want to comment on any specific elements of the paper?
Thank you, Chair. Just to note that the document is a draft. It's primarily retrospective and it covers the internal controls and the assurance framework in place up to the reporting date of 31st of March 2022. It's a document that's published alongside the annual statement of accounts. So it's subject to audit by our external auditors, Grant Thornton, as part of their statutory audit work, and that will consider whether the contents are consistent with their knowledge of the organisation and the governance arrangements in place. And the AGS will then form part of the published final statement of accounts, and it's anticipated that that final version will be presented to this committee at the 31st of October meeting. And any significant governance issues that have arisen since the reporting date will be included in that final version of the annual governance statement.
Thank you. Do I have comments or points from committee members? Councillor Bowles.
Thank you, Chair. Right. I think this looks quite different to the statements that, a little bit different to the statements that we've received in the past. I guess in some respects it probably has less data and statistics in it than previously, which some could say that's a good thing. some could say that it's probably not so good. I guess one of my overall comments is that I think in many instances we have stated that we do something. So, for example, we had a citizens' assembly as one of our consultations. We have a delivery plan which outlines our outcomes, but and I guess this was where we were coming from in terms of our understanding how many have done the mandatory training. We've listed it as a control, but we haven't necessarily said whether it's effective or not. So that would be probably one of my overarching comments, because I think I have a question on every single principle where we've stated a control, that it is a control, but there's well, with effective control, but we haven't said why we think it's an effective control. So I guess that is one of my overall comments. I have a number of specific ones, but I know I've been talking a lot already, so I'm not quite sure if other members had questions. But if not, I can go through each of my detailed questions.
Go through yours first,
Okay,
and then we'll come back with that.
Please do.
Right, so if I just start from the very beginning, page 30, just a very quick question. Value for money continues to be a concern of the council and the guardianship of public funds, and a focus on the Balfour BT Living Places contract, but could equally apply to other long-term contracts that were agreed in good faith. So it's not a contract that we have in place, but I guess my question is around Hoople and how does value for money, in a similar way. I mean, we were outsourcing more and more activities to Balfour BT. We're essentially doing the same thing with Hoople. So I guess my first question is, if we've mentioned Balfour BT, what is the situation around Hoople and value for money and what we need to do around that?
So I suppose putting it in terms of the annual governance statement, the question really is, given the large proportion of the council's revenue that passes through people, why have we not mentioned people in terms of the value for money concern? What controls have we got in place which might, again, assure us that people is value for money? Now, accepting that Hoople is an almost wholly owned technical company of the council, it necessarily means it's in a different realm to an external third-party independent supplier. But there still must be a question as to whether Hoople that reports through an annual financial statement, how we as a council would be able to assure that the activities of Hoople represented value for money. Because it's a almost fully owned subsidiary, it's not necessarily a simple mechanism of looking at whether it makes a profit or not, because one would assume that its pricing structure would be relatively friendly towards its giant parent. But how can we be assured that Hoople is not propping up with resources, is actually working to provide, well, that key phrase, value for money, I suppose. And that's perhaps something. Now, it may be that because it's a third-party technical company, it isn't covered by our annual governance statement. I don't know, but I feel it ought to be. Perhaps that officers come back.
Thank you. So just to clarify that it's a statement about the governance and the internal controls rather than an opinion on the value for money arrangements, and that's going to be assessed separately by our external auditors, Grant Thornton. And in the training that I delivered last week, we talked around the different principles within value for money, and governance is a key element of their work in that area, and the Hoople contract will be considered as part of their work. In terms of our assurance over the accounts of Hoople as a subsidiary, the position and performance are incorporated into the council's financial statements through the group accounts. Hoople as a company is subject to its own statutory audit, and Grant Thornton will rely on the work of that the other audit firm as part of their opinion on our financial statements and the group accounts.
Yeah. Andrew, do you want to add to that?
And as people know, I am currently a director of People, so that's a declaration of interest on that. But I think you hit on a key point, Chair. The TECL arrangements, and this is a court judgment, I think, last century, 1998-99, on there. Would it help committee if we gave you a bit of a refresher of what TECL means and what that means in terms of how the council operates with TECL-based companies? So that probably is would be whether we did it in a written briefing or a small training session, just to make sure that you're all comfortable with that before your next meeting, because hopefully Grant's ultimately in a position to conclude their audit process and you will be agreeing the final entries. So that may be just a bit of briefing or education for you, just to refresh you on what TECL means.
I think that will help for those members of the committee who aren't familiar with, as indeed I wasn't a few years ago, what a TECL company is. I think, though, the underlying concern is the decision to form People at the outset was presumably made on some financial and resource implications which would benefit the council in the longer term. My position as Chair of Audit and Governance would say, how can you assure me that that has in fact taken place? How can I show council that Audit and Governance is assured that the arrangement is a value for money arrangement? It's where Audit and Governance, I always have this difficulty, Audit and Governance, where it sort of treads the narrow path of scrutiny, because this would have been a decision by executive, and we're not here to consider considerations by executives either now or in the past, but we are here to ask how the executive can illustrate, can give assurance to council that this is the best, or that this is an effective method of delivering the outputs that Hoople is delivering. And I think, as in the same way as Audit was looking at Balfour Beatty's contract, there should be some mechanism for looking at how Hoople is delivering what it's delivering for the council. That's not to suggest that it's not being effective and efficient in its working, but its statement of accounts and its audit by a financial auditing body isn't going to give the council assurance on efficiency. So, by way of illustration, if Hoople was twice the size it is now, but doing exactly the same work, how would we might know, because it seems to be expensive, but there is no mechanism by which on an ongoing basis we can recognise whether it's being profligate with resource or not profligate with resource, apart from the fact that obviously we have a director on this board that would take an interest in that. But I'm conscious that from the council's point of view, and through audit, we don't seem to have a mechanism to say, it's actually the best thing since sliced bread, and this is the reason why. So I haven't got an answer, but it might be something that I'm sure an auditor, in the same way as the auditor looks at value for money for the council, perhaps we should seem to be giving a reason to give the auditor more work, which is not a thing I was anxious to do, but I think to give us as a committee the ability to give assurance on the activity of people that there might be some mechanism to that. Perhaps I could ask you just to I mean, other councils with TECL companies must be in exactly the same position. I don't know what they do. Perhaps the external auditor or the internal auditor might have some input to that. Does committee, sorry,
Yeah, no, I'm just following on your comment. I mean, there seems to be one that the external auditor should be the one who should be advising here. I'm a bit concerned the internal auditor is almost, of course they're internal, and we've even got the same directors within both the TECL and the internal auditor. I think we do need an external view. Your question seems to be a perfect valid one. How do you know that value for money is actually occurring by having a TECL? I mean, it's as simple as that. And council should be asking that question because it is part of, but outside of as a structure legally, as a separate structure, but it is fundamentally a way in which the council operates. So asking the question, is it value for money, seems to be pretty fundamental. So whoever looks at that, is that not the external auditor at the very least?
I mean, there would have been a decision made to create the TECL.
Yeah,
and that would have been made on
it's about what it
financial
does.
considerations. So, I mean, the question that I might be asking is as simple as, are the recommendations that were made at the time, have they come out in practice to be?
Yeah, I think there's a difference here between what the TECL actually being set up as a TECL does. That is that an efficient means of things to be done? Yes, because that's one question. The second is what it is doing. Is it doing it efficiently? Is it value for money? So internally on that, how do we get that reassurance that actually those things because we're adding more to the Hoople list all the time, saying, well, Hoople can do this, Hoople can do that. Fine. The assumption is that it is then being done more efficiently than it could have been done otherwise.
So,
and I think it's reassurance that we in governance need to have on that aspect.
if it was a commercial practice, so if we were a huge corporate which had subsidiaries providing services, we would be going out to the market occasionally to look at aspects of those services to see whether our internal market reflected the external environment. So that's probably what needs to happen, but I'm not instinctively sort of going down that route. Andrew, sorry, you wanted to speak.
Well, Joe, I was just going to I think there are three elements here that we're talking about. In terms of value for money, Grant Thornton picked that up at last year's value for money audit, and I'm not going to speak on behalf of Pete, but that'll be a recurring theme in the value for money audit. Annual governance is more about the statement of accounts rather than assurances around value for money. So I think these are valid points you're raising in terms of value for money, and that'd be a good line of questioning to Grant Thornton at the next meeting. In terms of the wider position, is the decision the council took right one based on what colleagues on Scrutiny Management Board, it's on their work programme to have a look. So I think that there are a number of threads that are in play here. And we're asking you to look at the annual governance statement, which is the quite narrow bit about governance in the accounts, but you're making valid points about value for money, which is the next piece of work that Grant Thornton will carry out.
Chair, can I just ask? Sorry, can I just ask a historic question? With the birth of Hope into this council, was it as a result of the demise of another company? And were they audited and it was found that they weren't delivering the goods?
No, well, I wasn't here when it was born.
I just wanted to know the history.
Councillor Andrews might have known that.
Thank you, Chair. No, it was sort of created from scratch, so to speak. Could I just say, I mean, I know I'm brand new to this committee, but to me it would seem patently obvious that if Hoople is providing services to this council, we should audit them to see that they are offering value for money. And I can't understand why there's all these queries about it.
Yeah, well, I think the queries are more to do with the processes, how we manage that, because they're an arm's length organisation.
Are we putting money into the council money? Then they need to be audited.
Well, I mean, I'm not. They certainly are audited. but it's I suppose a reflection of the type of audit. So we're not looking necessarily at just a financial audit already exists. It's more of a go back to this corny phrase, value for money audit, just so that we can be aware of no competitive assurance on these elements. Sorry, Councillor Davis, have you had that together?
I haven't had the answer yet as to.
Right,
Someone let me know how
company that
this.
was created
From scratch.
from scratch at the
Yes,
time.
it was created.
Because.
It's because at that time there was a view that it would reflect better value for money for council to operate in that manner.
At the time, I think it was considered that we should outsource almost everything. This was a government policy virtually.
Sorry.
Alice,
Can I help a little bit?
Yeah.
Hooper was a joint venture, so it's not a subsidiary of the council. Sorry, I'm going to get a bit lawyerly now. Apologies. It's a joint venture originally created between the PCT, Y Valley NHS Trust, and the council to deliver efficiencies in ICT and finance to those three organisations. So I can't say whether it meets its original criteria from 2011, but that was the original reason it was set up. It is a Companies Act company. It's a proper company. It isn't part of the council. And poor Andrew and Rachel and everybody who will listen to me get sick and tired of me saying that. The prices we pay for the services we buy from Hoople are published every year as part of the SLA decision. And yes, it doesn't help here, but I can absolutely guarantee if we were paying Hoople more for any of those services than another company, we would have challenges coming out of our ears. Because the only thing that TECL Regulation 12 allows us to do is not go through a full procurement process to award them work. There is no other advantage. Looking at the action track and everything, a lot of work is going on around Hoople and how it's managed and the shareholding arrangements, which is needed because the law doesn't stand still. And we're looking at new procurement regs coming in next year, and we'll be having an entirely different conversation at the time.
well, in which case, perhaps I could make a recommendation that the new audit committee is in the coming financial year is briefed on TECL and Hoople measure, so that these questions are sort of answered, because it is a huge part of the council expenditure, and we need to have those areas cleared. Councillor Bolton.
Thank you. So if I run back then on my comment on Hoople, so I guess, do we need to have, we are talking about governance structures and continuous improvement to our governance structures. So there is no mention, I don't think, within this document. We've mentioned Balfour Beatty, but there's no mention of Hoople. So should there be something within the annual governance statement, whether it's an action that we are doing something, we're improving the governance arrangements over Hoople. So that, I think, perhaps closes, that would be perhaps a recommendation, Chair, that we include something in here.
It would be helpful, wouldn't it, for all councillors, I'm sure, and perhaps others, if what Alice has just explained to us was explained somewhere, and if it's not in the annual government statement, then I don't know where, so that we don't keep coming up with the same question. What you explained sort of does give some assurance that the relationship is an effective one.
Okay. So shall I move on to my next question?
Please do.
Sorry, committee. Right, my next question is on page 34, principle B, so ensuring openness and comprehensive stakeholder engagement. So I think we have noted a number of things that we have done during the year, such as Citizens Climate Assembly, but I guess how effective were they, and are we taking action as a result? So you're, in terms of ensuring open and comprehensive stakeholder engagement, yes, we are taking comprehensive stakeholder engagement, but was it the right engagement? Was it effective? And how are we closing the loop in terms of how are we applying the feedback? What changes are happening as a result? So I think this was from my earlier comments about the fact that we're stating that we're doing things, but I can't clearly see whether they were the right things to do or not. And whether they were effective, and whether we should be doing them again or not. So I guess that is my first comment on stakeholder engagement. My second comment on stakeholder engagement would probably be engagement with staff. I guess staff are a key stakeholder as well. I mean, we did talk about we've had implemented a new project management team over that financial year. Sorry, Andrew, for all the questions I asked at Scrutiny Management Board last week about it, but I guess I'm receiving a number of comments from staff across all levels about how the project management team is engaging or not engaging with members of staff. So it's a massive investment by the council, and so I guess it may not necessarily be something that needs to go into the annual governance statement, but it is a question about how we're ensuring that the project management team is effectively engaging in the stakeholders, i.e. the staff, and ensuring that we're getting that bottom-up feedback into projects, because at the moment I'm getting an impression that it's not as effective as it could be, and it's impacting project outcomes as a result. So I guess they're the two comments that I wanted to make on Principle B. If officers would like to make any comment.
Shall I just drone on for a couple of minutes and give officers time to think about their answers? So I think my understanding of the question is, certainly the second question is, we talk about the council, I think the paragraph also engages stakeholders in a range of consultations, and the council's dedicated web pages for consultations. I think it would be useful to, even in this, because this is a document for a specific year, it would be useful to reflect the consultations that took place in that year. And I think it would be useful to see the responses to those consultations as a datum, because again, that provides us with some degree of effectiveness of that. I'm anxious to pick up on this, is picking up effectiveness, so that we can work out a series over a number of years, seeing whether or not we're becoming more effective or less effective in this consultation, since it's a key control. The comment about internal consultation, I think we should have something in here that talks about internal consultation stuff. I know we have a staff sort of annual questionnaire, which I'm not sure is picked up on in here anywhere. But I think I take on board Councillor Bolton's point about staff being a significant stakeholder in the council. They're almost a significant stakeholder in the county, because our staff plus civil staff is several thousand. So we ought to reflect that. And hopefully that's giving you a bit of time to think about the answers you might give to Councillor Morrison.
I think in terms of your comment around that statement of our assessment of the effectiveness, I think we can consider how we incorporate that for each of the principles to outline what the results of that assessment are particular to this financial year, and that's separate then from the improvement recommendations that we've identified, which form the action plan for subsequent years. I think it is a weighty document, and there is challenge in including the results sometimes of the governance arrangements that are in place. There's a risk that this document could become a huge lengthy report. It is subject to external audit, which means that every item we include in there then has to be considered and tested. So there's a balance in presenting the controls and the effectiveness of those controls without producing lots of detail on the nature of the activity rather than the governance arrangement. Fully accept that we can clarify that assessment of effectiveness.
Great, thank you. And maybe include something about staff.
Yeah.
Stakeholder engagement. Yeah.
If the concern is that by including data, we then invite the external auditor to effectively have to audit our data sources. Is there a way to provide that data as a non-audited appendix, or is that? I just leave that as a concept, so that we would provide it. There would be no material advantage in us providing data which was wrong, but I appreciate that necessarily want the auditor so much work to. But I think that data is so valuable because it's very difficult to compare year-on-year information. Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, I'm trying to sort of slot in against Councillor Balderson so that we kind of do one section at a time. I think I get what you're saying about the fact that this is about the government arrangement, and we're setting them out, and we're not then backfilling them with pages of detail that comes up in different parts of the audit process, of documents that we get through internal and external audit reports that look at these things in more detail. So in that way I can see that this is possibly quite a good way of doing it. And I'm just mindful of the fact that we probably need to mark the fact that if we are referring to things, then we need to be clear of where they will come to us within the governance process, rather than asking for everything on one plate. So that's useful. I do feel that there is one action missing. Well, there's two things about the continuous improvement actions that we've got on here, and that's the one referring to the Citizens Assembly, which is it says that the engagement plan has been produced. So for me, for a governance statement, that is not part of an action plan. That should be in the main text to say that something's happened. It's not an action going forward. And if that engagement plan has been produced, then somewhere within that section there should be a link to it. So we're on page 35, sorry for that. And the other one, the final paragraph, the first paragraph on page 35, when it talks about my account being a feature of the website, with residents able to have their own digital account. I think we need to track that one, because that's a relatively new one, and therefore there should be something in the continuous improvement about how we're going to do it. I mean, I'm only talking from my own experience of trying to set up a my account and not being able to, still because I inadvertently saved an incorrect username, and they can't. So I have to change my username every time we go in. So if I don't understand it, I just wonder if the public who are going to be increasingly pointed to this are going to have a good experience or not of trying to contact pre-council. So for me, I think a large change like that should be part of our engagement process. Sorry, I'm not They're just my 2 points.
Thanks. Councillor Balderson, back to you. Back to
Shall I
your
move on to
report.
principle C?
Thanks.
Principle C, similar question, Heritage Council Cabinet agree the delivery plan. How are we tracking the delivery plan? Because it was raised in Scrutiny Management Board last week that the majority of the measurements are still, didn't have a lot of data. Q1, well, and I know we're talking about Q1, but Q1 had no data. So, so once again, you're making a statement, but you know, how are we tracking to the delivery plan? Because if we're not tracking to the delivery plan, then is it an appropriate? Hopefully, we are tracking to the delivery plan. And then Principle D, determining the interventions necessary to optimise the achievement of the intended outcome. Now, rightly so, you've talked a lot about Children's and Families Directorate, but once again, we had an improvement board with an improvement plan, but we've gone from requires improvement to inadequate during the period. So was that the right intervention? So I have, and it might just be the wording, and plus several issues were identified to be endemic across the organisation within the judgment, and there are no action plans identified in here to address some of those more endemic issues that were raised within that.
Should we just hold
Hold there.
there?
My next question's on E, so if anyone
under
has
Principle C, this issue of tracking to the delivery plan. I mean, under the continuous improvement, we've got the small accounts bid, producing economic strategy, progress actions and existence of climate assembly. But it would seem to me that tracking to the delivery plan and reporting on performance should be part of our continuous performance improvement under that area, even if we're apparently not achieving it currently because of resource. Would you comment on that?
I think again, we just need to be clear what's the governance arrangement and what's the activity and how are we monitoring that activity through quarterly performance reporting, and this document serves to identify the areas that we need to make improvements in our governance arrangement.
The report says we have to comment on the preparedness of actions to improve, which is what I was trying to really do, which is to say the action to improve might be to track to the delivery plan and provide performance statistics. Don't you think?
Chair, on that point, and I think the process is that the Cabinet are tracking that through their quarterly reports. So that is the process that's going through. Now, whether that process is working well is a slightly different question. I think it's probably not where the annual governance statement is. I think to suggest it's put as an improvement plan to improve the tracking, I think is a valid point. But we need to be slightly careful that this is about the governance arrangements, whether this committee feels those are adequate or not. And Scrutiny Management Board shared their views the other day on this. We need to be careful to allow them to do their work and to
absolutely, but I think external audit is going to be looking at this.
Oh, yeah.
It is going to be looking at this document, and I'm conscious that we should be expressing any comments that we have through external audit to comment on.
And Chair, I do struggle though, if we're listing it as yes, it is in a governance arrangement that we do have a delivery plan and that Cabinet do then track. But if they're not being able to track because the reason was given they didn't have the resources to develop the measures and give all the measures, if they're not able to track it, how can it be a control? So I do appreciate that it is outlining all the elements that we've got in place, but if they're not working effectively, then surely that needs to somehow be reflected, because it's not as effective as what it could be, and it wouldn't be achieving the aims. But and it's, I guess, just getting some of the language right.
Okay, you're going on to, Councillor Jennings.
Just to comment on that, in effect, was taking the points made. The question that needs to be asked of us in terms of, from us in governance terms is Cabinet able to track? Does it have the tools? Is it meeting that aim and requirement? And if Cabinet could come back and say, yes, we're able to do that, then we've asked the governance question. The Cabinet has said yes, and it will be held responsible. But if it then turns around and says, well, actually, we can't do it, we've achieved the question in governance, they've achieved their question of how do we achieve it, because it is something that's required. So it seems to me that the governance point is Cabinet able to do that? If it says, no, we can't, we don't have the tools to do it, that's a reply from them and to us.
Yeah, if I refer back to key considerations in the report, item 5, the AGS is a review of activities to ensure that the Council's internal control and governance framework is operating effectively. The statement explains how the Council has discharged its governance responsibilities during 21-22 and the key governance mechanisms in place to manage risk of failure in delivering outcomes and decision making. That's my concern, that we're not covering that area very effectively. And again, we've got to consider this is 21-22, not 22-23, which throws my mind out as well. So,
particularly with the next section, indeed.
That'll be somebody else's problem. Hopefully, 22-23. So it's a link through, but yeah. Does that provide any better clarity for officers? We're nodding, but hopefully it does. It's a difficult, I appreciate it's a difficult area to comment on, but let's move on. Councillor Davis, did you?
I was just wondering where the water has gone, Chair. Sorry.
Water.
Yeah, sorry, I was just thinking I'm desperately in need of a drink of water.
I could pop back to the cafe if you like and try and get some.
Sorry,
Yeah,
Chair.
that's fine.
No,
Thank you.
that's fine. Can I make my own request? I'm going to be desperately in need of a lead piece of power as well soon. I suddenly realised I haven't very much left.
Yeah.
So maybe we could have a break.
If I
Would members care for a 5-minute break?
Yes. Comfort break, Chair, sorry.
In which case, before we go on to Principal Lead, I will go for a 10-minute comfort break.
Thank
So we reconvene the public.
I confirm the live stream is back on, Mr. Chairman.
The live stream is back on. Thank you. So we are on agenda item 7, the draft annual governance statement 21-22. And we're about to turn to Councillor Bolton and a question or comment on Principal Lead, page 37.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My next question is around organisational capacity. And I guess reflecting on budget papers, all areas were impacted by staff vacancies, really across the board, not just in children. And I know we had, but recognising that we do have significant issues in relation to social workers, and which need to be addressed. But I guess what are the continuous improvement actions sort of addressing this broader issue? I can see that we've got new recruitment software installed, so it's how is that impacting or developing organisational capacity, and what are the actions around the vacancies across the board? That would be my First question, whether we have seen an impact yet. We did have an investment in the project management team, so whether we've seen an impact on capacity as a result of that investment, or whether that's something that will be realised during this financial year. So there might be questions around capacity fees.
Right, so I suppose the point is being made under principally continuous improvement, that there might be an action which more specifically relates to, and again, we have to reflect that this is 21-22, but it perhaps needs to still pay homage, as it were, to what's happening in 22-23, to address the impact, it's not the wording to use, but to address the impact of across the board vacancies.
And it did come out in quarter 4 report, which is in relation to this, this financial, this specific
particular
annual government statement, so I
Thank
still
you.
think it's relevant.
So I think if officers can put some thought to what can go into continuous improvement as an action, and it's probably going to be under the director of HR and OD, but I'm not certain what they can come up with there, which again can be reflected on in a term of effectiveness, because again reflecting back to that paragraph 5, how do we manage the risk of delivering risk of failures, delivering outcomes and decision making, in this instance outcomes, which obviously is a reduction in vacancies.
Sure.
And sorry, Chair, if they have any comment on capacity, whether the project management team is impacting the capacity issues, or whether we'll see that in the next financial year.
Joe, I'll have a chat with the lead for the PMO team, but in terms of having impact, yes, they are. And we need to recognise that part of that is bringing together the project management skills we had across the council into one place and recognising it as a discrete skill set. So yes, though we have taken on additional capacity, but we have also realigned capacity with the council to do that. But we'll make sure that those points are made in the next iteration report.
Thank you, Councillor General.
Can I make a general point here that this is a document that hopefully can be read by people who have no understanding. One of the key things is that it says right at the beginning it's the annual statement for 21-22. It doesn't say when in 21 to when in 22. And many of the changes that we're discussing, and some of the changes are things that will be occurring post that date. I think there needs to be a statement right at the beginning of actually what the year is in plain English terms, and it's a comment I'd make about one or two of the other aspects of this whole thing. But I do think plain English is required sometimes, and to read it in that way, there's an I appreciate the comment that was made right at the start. This is draft. I take the point. But I think there's an editorial responsibility to look at this in plain English. There are places where you use a number and then the next sentence you use the word. There are places where words are not correctly joined together. There's a gap. There's references that don't quite make sense in terms of what they're referring to. So somebody who has no idea needs to read this and see if they actually understand it at the end of it. Now, I'm getting pretty close to that person in that sense, but having got a bit more knowledge over the last few years, I do read this sometimes and I'm going, I think I'm going to have to read that sentence again to understand it. That tells me it's not perhaps as clear as it should be, or that it needs a footnote to explain what it is. Just like we just had a discussion around tackles, the fact is that most people wouldn't have a clue what a tackle is until it hit them, so to speak. So we've got to make sure that we write this in a way that matches that, and this very simple thing at the beginning, that it refers historically to a period. And yet people will be reading in their papers about something or online that's happening now and thinking, why isn't the council doing that? Why isn't it in here? Can we just view it through those eyes, please, in terms of reviewing it? Thank you.
So, yeah, yes, the points well made, and I suspect what it needs is a sort of expanded introduction in that under item 1, which sort of sets this confirms it is from April 2021 to the end of March 2022. But I think it would also be helpful for those that are not used to reading these kinds of documents if you do say, you know, the phrases in a different colour and underlined are hypertext links that should take you to another page. I know that might be overworking it a bit, but for somebody that's not used to working those kinds of documents, it might be a revelation to why those are. And I'm sure you have, or somebody is going through and just checking this vague book, because that's a pet bane that we've all come across. Okay.
Well, thank you. I'm most grateful, because I think that the section that refers to the children's services, the intensity of the work that's been done in the last few months does not appear logically, because it will appear in the following year. Anybody reading this would just wonder what on earth the council have been doing, even though it had done a huge amount at the time. It hoped to match some of the requirements, but clearly we've all learned the lesson since, and that will follow on. But it's this sort of missing link to where we are.
I'm not sure what parts of post-balance sheet events affect this statement, if at all.
So just to take your first point about the explanatory paragraph at the start of the statement, I think that's a good idea, and we can definitely be more explicit about the reporting period that it covers and where those improvements will be made in the period in which they'll be made. Sorry. In terms of this being a draft document, obviously we will fully proofread and go through some quality control before it's finally published. And once published on the website, we'll go through some additional controls to make sure that things like hyperlinks are clear to the user of the document. The final version will reflect any governance arrangements that have occurred since the writing of this document, roughly in April, and that will include an update on children's services, and we're engaged with the Commission at the moment to discuss how we do that in this document. So that will reflect activity that has taken place since the balance sheet date.
And then do we get that, sorry, Chair, do we get that then back for us to scrutinise before it finally hits the
we get that back
system?
As a final draft. It's not really a final, but as a final document, but obviously one that we can still input into should we desire so to do.
Yep, the final version will come to this committee at the next meeting.
Right, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm not sure who was first.
It's all right.
I don't know, but I'm in that queue as well.
Oh,
Right.
No,
Oh.
if you go first. and
oh,
then
thank,
I'll-
thank,
I'll
thank,
follow.
thank you. I was querying managing risks and performance through robust internal control and strong public financial management. I look at the third paragraph down. A service planning tool. What is that, please? Is available.
Sorry, could you just say which page you're on?
I'm looking at my paper copy, which is page 39.
Thank you.
In that case.
Thank you.
Chair, so sorry, Polly, I was just wondering, because we were taking section principle by principle, and could I retract and say, could I say
Yes.
my,
First.
what I wanted to say
I'll
on the
come back to
principle
that
that
one.
under discussion at the moment, and come back to the following, yes, to your point after that, if that makes sense.
That's the bottom.
Yeah, so just sticking with principle E at the moment, for purposes of the following the meeting. One thing that I did notice about this, well, two things I've noticed. One was, yes, we're acknowledging that we've got a historic report here. And I'm pleased to see on the continuous improvement plan that we've got addressing compliance of staff not completing mandatory training. And we know at the beginning of the meeting that we've actually been looking at the figures of those. So it's, for me, that's, that assures me that this process is working, that we are actually, we're following up on these actions, and hopefully these actions will then fully feed into the work streams that we have here. One other one that I did notice, and this again is on page 10, is about the agenda pay gap we had back then on the 31st of March 2021, which is has increased to 13.9. Then we have got an action plan for that, so that every pound earned by a male employee, a female employee earns 86 pence. And I think for me, this just kind of, this really is the kind of detail when you put it into an old historic report, Councillor Jim, reinforces what you were saying. We know that as well, that under new Chief CEO, there's been quite a major transformation on staff as well. So I'm certainly looking forward to seeing the new figures in for this year's 22-23 when it comes out, and hopefully that will be going in the right direction, because to have had that gap in 21 is quite concerning. So it'll be very useful to see what that gap will be as we come into the new governance statement. So I think that's just what I wanted to say on that. But also interim, I'm wondering whether, Chair, that's the kind of thing we might want an update on as to where are we now, or whether we just leave it until the next government statement and wait for the reporting cycle.
I think it's, well, I think those figures are reported to council anyway. So I think we need to leave it to that to report. This appears, as I said, as a specific item in the annual government statement, and I suspect it will do for a number of years to come. And it will appear in the final version. So perhaps if we move on to Principle F at this point, and Councillor Andrews.
Sorry. Thank you, Chairman. I was just interested in, it's on page 39 of my paper agenda, managing risks and performance through robust internal control and strong public financial management. It's the third paragraph down that caught my eye. A service planning tool, whatever that is available to teams to use, which record actions, performance and risks. It has been refined in February 2022, but again with a range of new starters to the organisation, it is not clear on its universal use. The Council does not operate an overarching system for tracking actions, with actions generated by the delivery plan, committees, cabinet briefings, swap audits, external audits, with the risks being missed.
What is that?
Yes. Could someone explain that all to me? Preferably in simple English.
Andrew?
Yes, I have to, and again, this is the snapshot for the 21-22 year. So we had a number of projects that we weren't tracking what we were doing, so the system is Virto tracking, making sure everything is in the system where we track the risks and decisions things are escalated if there is a problem. And it comes back to this sort of a major part of what the project management PMO office are doing. So at that point in time, we were aware there were a number of projects that weren't being managed as they should be and risks were being missed. So we will revisit the wording of that because we're taking on board documents about plain English. This is a good example of non-plain English, so we will convert that. But that's what that paragraph is trying to get across to you, that at that time, 21-22, things were not being done as they should have done, which is partly why we set up the PMO office in the first place.
So, Andrew, can we assume then that from, we're still in 2022, that things have improved? And where's the evidence to show that they have?
They definitely have improved, and it's on your action list to get a report back from the head of PMO to this committee to tell you where they are. So yes, that's on its way through, but there have been significant major improvements in getting.
Has there?
Yes, so we've got various boards, so everything is now into Verto, so that will come through in that paper.
So under the continuous improvement on page 40, we've got investigate purchases software for recording and monitoring actions. Was that Verto or was Verto already? I think Verto was already in.
We had Verto in places, so
Yeah.
we have Verto as the corporate approach, and the first recommendation is for me is about using the service planning tool. So we're now doing that. We have a board system it's a dashboard that reports to me on a monthly basis, compliance and non-compliance.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, can I follow up on this, because I think it's an important point, and it's about how we write these things. Because the statement there is the council does not operate. So it's actually in the present tense when somebody reads that. Now, I think the point that's being raised is you've recognised the problem, and actually it's the council did not operate an overarching system in that year. You've now recognised it, that needs to be said, and a system has been put in place. Then one can feel reassured. On the other hand, if it says it does not, it sounds as though it's a continuing problem. And I think that therein lies part of how we read and what this means. I think it's a good example of that particular point.
Okay, yeah, good point, thank you. Councillor Hobson.
Yeah, thank you. And also just to follow up on that, it talks about actions generated by the delivery plan, committees, cabinet and cabinet briefings, etc. So, and I think the chair asked F2 on page 40, investigate purchase of software for recording and monitoring actions. Is that because at the moment, the performance framework and the reports that go to cabinet, they have the budget, they have actions for against the delivery plan, and they have the risk register, but none of it is really linked. So in terms of all these risks that have been identified on our risk registers, etc., there's no linkage to the delivery plan or corporate plan objectives. Is that the objective of F2, or is that something different?
Chair, I guess the objective is to link them through, and if we send the body of the report, the tool we're using is Power BI. So we'll go in with that. So again, I think it's the timing issue. When this was first drafted, we hadn't made that final decision for Power BI, so that's where you've got recommendation F2, so that needs to be reworded to reflect that.
So Power BI, did you say?
Power BI, yes.
So that takes out organisational objectives and links it down to service objectives and risks.
It's a reporting tool that enables us to report these things. So it interrogates the various systems we have across the council to pull all this data through. So it doesn't.
So it's not linking things up, it's just making information more available.
Well, it does link things up, but it makes it much easier to consistently interrogate data. So that's partly what we're doing. We have a number of systems that traditionally didn't speak to each other. So Verto now has the financial reports in Verto are pulled automatically through Business World, which is our financial reporting tool. So that a lot of the work that we're doing in IT strategy is to make sure those links are in place. Otherwise, you rely upon somebody to tap them in or put it into a spreadsheet. So those are the things. So it's getting greater data quality and consistency. That's a big thing.
Thank you. Could I just move to bottom page 39, where it talks about governance of settlement agreements needs to be reviewed and confirmed with policy. There's no obvious continuous improvement that comes out of that. How are we confirmed that has taken place? Thank you. Okay, I've read that and not, the words haven't impacted. So that's a policy that would be agreed with the employer, has been agreed with the employer panel, am I presuming? If it says there's a governance of settlement is being reviewed and confirmed policy, there should be a policy somewhere that somebody can refer to.
I haven't seen that policy, we can raise that with the director.
Yes, I was conversation with Claire, yes, yeah.
Sorry, at the bottom of page 39.
This is private.
We're not aware necessarily that policy currently is embodied, but if one is, we will find it.
I seem to recall as well, Councillor, that some of the employment panel work came into re-governance at some point and was, well, I'm not sure.
That was,
Processes and procedures.
I think that was just very specific elements that needed to be updated in the constitution. I'm not quite sure if that relates to stuff.
If that could be clarified. And Councillor Bonson?
Yes, last two questions on this item. 3/4 of the way down, page 39, talks about the council published a value for money strategy, and that goes on to talk about cabinet received a major contract performance update, and then finishing with an improvement plan was agreed on the 1st of March 22. So I guess, how do we know if this improvement plan is driving positive outcomes? So that's my first question, and then so similar to some of the points I made earlier. And then in the next paragraph, it talks about spend was at approximately 86% of budget for HCCTP, but from memory, I think the budget has now been, did we not approve a change in the budget? So I was just, 86, is that, I guess it's clarification, because it probably is an 86% of the budget now, was it? Because, but I'm not quite sure at what point. I'm pretty sure it went through council or.
Wouldn't that came in 21 to 22, not now?
I just had a question around the 86%. So I guess they're my two questions on this page.
We'll clarify at what point that stat is produced, because obviously it's a moving target.
And it may be worth pointing the budget. That budget increase was approved by council and it was
And then just.
and the issue about the improvement plan is, yes, if we've got an improvement plan under continuous improvement, it would be good to say how we're measuring that improvement plan and who's responsible from the council leadership team for delivering the improvement plan.
And those minutes are in public domain, so there's an ongoing update on our website. So
they're a great opportunity to put in yet another hyperlink plan, I guess, to pick that up. Thank you for your is that everything under this agenda item? Thank you, Councillor Bolton. Good deal of comment. Councillor Bartlett.
On page. No. I think I'm moving on to the next agenda. I do apologise.
That's all right. That's all right. That's fine. So, have we any other comments on Agenda item 7. I think there were quite a few comments that we've made. I don't know if we've managed to capture them all, or whether you need to go through the recording of this meeting in order to confirm those comments.
I think colleagues have also been taking notes, but I think the principal point, I think, really was about commentary on the effectiveness being included against each principle, with appropriate clarifications in relation to who's limited, internal and external consultation, the availability of engagement plan, the tracking of delivery actions, organisational capacity, the availability of policy and settlement payments, capital expenditure percentage in terms of HCCTP, and responsibility for delivery of the improvement plan. And also that the document be reviewed and to do some plain English, including Spanish paragraph and reporting period, and with appropriate links to relevant glossaries. And also action in terms of the membership of the committee receiving a briefing on tech arrangements and people limited in this year 2023-24.
Fine, thank you. I think that well captures, thank you, Ben,
Well said, Ben.
the scope of our comments. Colleagues, we have a further opportunity to examine this planning before us as a final sort of version next time. So if there's anything else in the interim, please do raise it. And in terms of the recommendation, put it to you, we have determined whether the draft annual statement properly reflects the fiscal environment that the council is operating in, and that the actions identified represent an appropriate response, subject to the recommendations as referred to by the clerk. Can I just have a show of hands? Thank you.
Sure.
Sure.
Just make a quick comment, because we've talked a little bit about Hoople, and I think it'd be quite good just to stick it on the record that, I in the past pointed out to directors of Hoople that their board minutes are never up to date. I had the opportunity while we had the break just to check, and the last board minutes are March. Now, if we're talking about risk and we're talking about knowledge and understanding, and if the main way in which we're going to get that is to understand what the board agenda minutes are, those have got to be up to date. Seems to me that there is an immediate comment that of how do you manage risk if you can't get sight of the minutes that must be pertinent. There must have been meetings since then, because they're every 2 months. And I know I've raised this directly before with regard to this, and I've just noticed it now when I went to check again. So I think it'd be wise if perhaps the director who might be present would like to mention it through the system. Thank you.
We have a board meeting this week, and I will make sure that it's raised and one and actioned as well. Thank you for going to raising.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Director Lockwood. Moving to agenda item 8, ICT business continuity, resilience and disaster recovery. The reason for this report was to provide further general information relevant to the committee's wish to explore issues around disaster recovery and related risks of greater depth, and to consider matters in relation to ICT business continuity and cyber security resilience. This is partly an extension to our examination of risk and an element of a dive into a specific risk relating to activity which we're all aware of in terms of other councils who have had issues with a failure in data security of varying types, which has impacted adversely not only on their financial record but also on their performance. So I think Mike Ibbotson, our interim ICT lead, client lead, is there on Zoom, and we're also anticipating Simon Mortimer, who's the head of information technology at Hoople, present on the call. The report is succinct, but I think it addresses aspects of assurance well. I don't know if the presenters want to comment further on the report for the benefit of the any public ourselves that might be listening.
Good afternoon, Chair. Thank you for that invitation. And apologies that I cannot be there in person. I'm currently testing positive for COVID, so I wouldn't want to inflict my infections upon the committee. The report stands as written. I've briefly addressed some of the outstanding audits which were previously discussed in committee. Just to note on that, SWAP, our internal auditors, the Southwest Audit Partnership, has begun a new piece of work, which is quite a thorough, broad brush piece of work at my request, and that work is underway and will sweep up a number of different areas. In terms of, I've tried to outlay very briefly the items which may be of interest to the committee in looking at this particular area of risk, which is of course a very present and real risk and of concern to everyone working in information technology, both within government, local government, and elsewhere. There are several opportunities there to protect ourselves as best we can. You can never ever fully assure protection, but part of my assignment I'm an interim. I'm an ex-IT director. I've been asked to pick up a piece of work to produce a technology strategy, which is the key piece of my work for Herefordshire. And as part of that strategy, I will always, of course, be looking towards areas where there might be opportunities for improvement. And as and when those opportunities are identified, and certainly in the piece of work, the technology strategy that I will deliver, those opportunities will be flagged up and will be taken through the usual service and any budget planning that may be required from them. So that's pretty much where we are for now as I see the situation. I've only been with Herefordshire since the beginning of July, so just 12, 13 weeks. And Simon Mortimer, as head of IT for Hoople, has much more familiarity with the technology infrastructure and is here. Hopefully between us we can answer any questions the committee might have. Thank you.
Thank you. Turning to committee, I don't know if anyone's got any questions on this report. Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mike, and I hope you'll start feeling better soon. So, I think really thinking about the work that you've got here, and thank you, because it does reflect a lot of what we were talking about when we spoke to you last time. And I suppose the only two questions I have are on page 45, where we have the partly completed action at the top of the page around the workaround solution that we've got at the moment that's going to become historical. And then at the bottom of the page, we still have an action around the system that is not covered by the SLA. And I guess what I want to be assured of is, possibly by the route of the action tracker, that the work when it's completed, will be flagged to us or not, as the case may be, so that we can be assured that we can finally draw a line under everything that we ask for, if that's possible. I think probably, yeah, they're my own two.
Can officers address those?
Yes, Chair, happy to respond. So firstly, any partially completed actions will be further flagged through the current swap work, and are certainly of interest to me in completing the strategy. And the SLA will be thoroughly reviewed by the time I complete my work, to ensure it is as good as it possibly can be. What I'm saying there is we need to look at what we actually need from Hoople IT services. We need to look at where those services should come from, in terms of in terms of Hoople providing them, and also whether that is whether that meets our needs for the future. So yes, absolutely, all of those areas should be covered and will be.
Thank you. And just the next paragraph down then, for those that are not covered by the SLA, but is also incomplete, presumably that will have. Was that part of the same work, or will it have its own little way of having to work through things that are not in the Hoople SLA?
It's part of the same work to decide whether the SLA is fit for purpose.
Can I just come in and ask a couple of points? One on confirmation that we are, as a council members of the West Midlands WARP, the warning advisory point. So we're part of a group that advises each other on activity that on nefarious activity, I suppose is a right word, that we see on our systems. And also what the current attitude is towards sort of professionalism in this specific area, in relation to employees gaining qualifications from the CISSP and CISM, who are the sort of qualification bodies looking at computer security and this area. I'm quite interested in sort of driving up professionalism and trying to encourage officers, where possible, to obtain appropriate qualifications in the work they're employing. I just want some sort of reassurance, I suppose, from managers in this area that is being encouraged.
Chair, can I ask that Simon Mortimer answers that question, as these are his Hoople staff?
Thank you, Simon.
So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. Absolutely, Hoople takes responsibilities around information security very seriously. As you would expect, we have a number of operational and procedural guidelines that we follow that we would look to achieve assurance on any platform that we're involved in the procurement or management of. And you've picked up that there are a number of platforms which are outside of the SLA agreement with Hoople, but potentially in use with the council. And I think Mr. Ibbetson's explained his intention to close that gap during his time with us. In terms of information security qualifications for the staff, we have a dedicated information security officer. We can share details if needed of his qualifications, but the general principles of information security are embedded across the organisation through a number of standards that we achieve. We're ISO 27001 audited regularly, and we have Cyber Essentials Plus assurance as well. Now, they're not explicitly required by Herefordshire Council, but they are within our position as a delivery partner for a number of other local agencies, some of which have been discussed in your meeting so far. So we exist to serve the needs of the council and your desires and requirements. So I'm very happy to look at providing explicit standards if needed, but at the moment we encourage the development of the staff into new qualifications, and I'll certainly discuss with the Information Security Officer what he wants to do next in his career, if that makes sense.
Thank you. So that's interesting what you say, that we're not specific in our requirements for ISO 27001. All the active cyber defence element. Would you, whereas other of your clients are, is that the inference I'm taking from that?
Let's be clear. No, not at all. You do have a number of standards which you're required to meet, such as the HSCN, so the assurance of system management reaching certain obligations for connection to the government networks. So there are other measures which you take to guarantee systems standards and operations. The ISO 27001 standard in particular is around an organizational approach and an organizational maturity to regularly checking that XYZ is achieved. Now, the swap audit is a good example of where you are auditing against things which ISO requires. So in a way, you're achieving your assurance through your audit process rather than necessarily saying that we meet a certain standard. It's helpful for us to already be at that standard, because when you audit us, we can provide the same evidence. So it's a time-saving exercise. But I was not meaning to infer that you're missing a trick, as it were. I think it's just a helpful position that we're able to demonstrate for you.
Thank you for that. But nevertheless, I think, Mike, you might want to comment in any eventual report you're providing as to whether our key performance indicators or whatever we use in relationship with the contract with Hoople should require or not that Hoople should show their conformity with a performance standard such as ISO 27001. Because that then, in a way, precludes the need to use internal audit to audit something that Hoople is already being audited upon, even if that's self-auditing reporting. I'm not familiar with ISO 27001, thankfully, but I don't know whether it's a self-auditing thing or whether you do get external audits coming in.
You get reassessed every 3 years.
Yeah. So it is. It would be of assurance to the council to know that was in place. Thank you, Councillor Ginley.
Yeah, on page 47, paragraph 15, you make the comment there are also, and increasingly, a number of suppliers of hosted systems which are run on their infrastructure, which the council simply connect. I just wonder if you could quantify what is actually meant by that, because it says increasingly. I mean, is this sort of exponential growth? Is this a growth that is in itself a risk of increasing concern? Or is this simply something where we're doing, it's really quite a simple addition of a few extra numbers? I'm also mindful that with the new integration of healthcare with social care, the council is going to find itself having to match up, I would imagine, quite a lot of different systems. And it's not unknown, shall I put it, that the NHS has had quite a lot of problems in the past with its IT systems, and indeed with breakdown of them, because so many of them were So much of their end point were somewhat, shall we say, old systems. Is that something of which we need to be particularly aware, and is particular attention therefore going in that direction?
Thank you. Happy to respond. Hosted systems. I don't see an exponential growth in particularly in Herefordshire. Some organisations have set out their stall and said we want to adopt cloud come what may. Most local government organisations, in my experience, have a relatively pragmatic approach. We will adopt hosted systems where and when that is sensible and cost effective to do so. Hosted systems, I think, just need a little bit of thinking about and planning, because the responsibilities are slightly different, and the dangers are slightly different. I don't think they're by themselves per se any riskier or any better than on-premise solutions. But I think they just need a bit of care in that selection. For instance, major hosted systems such as, well, we can pick the Microsoft ones, Amazon, so forth. They're incredibly sophisticated setups. They're very, very, they're often use very cutting edge security tools. They're incredibly resilient, and they're very, very good. However, of course, some other hosted systems will be much smaller operations. We may get a supplier of a line of business system which has only 20 or 30 users. They have only 10 or 15 customers, and that's a very, very different thing. So when we procure these things, we just need to be careful, and we need to ask for the right information and ensure that they also comply with standards that we would find acceptable. Turning to integrated care, yes, of course, as just in very, very general terms, and I might ask Simon if he wishes to respond. I suspect so. He's been very close to this work. Part of the advantage of Hoople having some vision across Wye Valley Trust and Herefordshire Council. In general, it's pretty much the same in the sense of, yes, it does add complexity. The moment you start linking systems, you produce paths between them, which bad actors, as we would call them, people who are causing trouble, can exploit potentially. If they were not plugged together, then they couldn't exploit it. So you're absolutely right. Fundamentally, it adds a risk, but it also drives through an advantage. And maybe Simon can add some detail to that.
Without repeating too much what you've already covered, Mike, absolutely. So the integrated care system, which was recently established in July of this year, replacing the previous clinical commissioning groups and similar, is leading in this region, and the strategies around that digital integration which you speak. Hoople is invited to attend various points of planning around that, and we do so representing the technical interests of a number of actors in this area. So we represent Herefordshire Council and Wye Valley NHS Trust as technical providers, but also we're involved in the delivery of a number of primary care services in this region as well. And if you look at the progress in the NHS digital national achievements which have been published, Herefordshire is actually quite far ahead. And one of the reasons for that is that we've been able to communicate well between those agencies involved and get them to the standards that's required. What I would say is that the Integrated Care Board, I'm sure, would be very happy to furnish you with more information about their governance and their approach to the steps that are needed. I know that they have some very mature processes of information governance and release around the implication of these platforms, and the concern that you've raised around what does the integration bring, what exposure does that give us, is front and center about what they're doing. They're a very sensible, very open and reactive organisation. So we're very happy to work with them. Can provide more specifics if needed.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you, Mike. If there's no other questions from the committee, can I just again reiterate our thanks for you in both in preparing this report for us, and we look forward to later information coming from SWOT when they've completed their piece of work, if that's relevant for us. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair.
Passing on to agenda item 9. There's no the recommendation. Thank you, Spotter, is that the committee notes the current assessment of the status in all matters of scope noted above. So
Note the report.
we noted the report. Thank you. Thank you for that. Agenda item 9, the energy from waste loan update. The purpose for this, as committee members may be aware, that we have a specific and almost unique requirement in our constitution to look after and report on the energy from waste loan. This report updates the committee on the current status of the energy from waste loan arrangement to enable the committee to fulfil its delegated function. The recommendations that we're asked to pass are that the risks of the council as joint lender are confirmed as being reasonable and appropriate, having regard to the risks typically assumed by long-term senior funders to waste projects in the United Kingdom and best banking practice, and the arrangements for the administration of the loan are reviewed and confirmed as satisfactory. I don't know, Rachel, if you want to comment on the report. It's similar to reports we've received in previous years, I believe.
Thank you, Chair. So the report provides assurance to the council as lender that the amounts have been repaid in the year in accordance with the terms of the loan arrangement, and also on Mercia's ability to make future repayments in line with the agreement. On paragraph 7 to 9, the report confirms that repayments have been made in the year, and we've received a ratio compliance certificate which assesses their ability to pay in future, and there are no indicators of risk to note.
Can I just ask, is by part of this, we've received the certificate that there are no concerns about West Mercia Waste Management Limited. Do we, as part of that, conduct a credit review on that company on an annual basis?
I think part of the loan agreement has a 6-monthly review of the ratios.
Right.
So that would incorporate that.
That's incorporate that. That's excellent. Thank you. Any questions, Councillor Jindal?
Just wondering, given the current change in interest rates massively, how that has affected any consideration on this, or are we tied to a fixed rate loan? Is this a fixed rate entity, which in itself for some companies actually is causing them problems because they borrowed themselves against more variable rates? So I just wondered whether the current situation is making any difference.
It is a fixed rate loan, and the complex financial model that underpins the ratio compliance agreement monitors their future ability. So any changes in the economic climate that are impacting on the company's ability to make repayments will be alerted to those through that monitoring.
I'm aware that for many companies they put a plus or minus percentage which doesn't bear any relationship to where it's actually now gone to. So some are having to revisit those positions. It would be good to ensure that we don't wait 6 months to revisit it, but to make sure that we are assured that there's not going to be a sudden surprise in a couple of months' time.
Is the loan looked after by the Treasury Management team, or is this outside the Treasury Management function? So, would it be the similar officer?
So yes, and jointly with Worcestershire County Council, who are the majority.
Worcestershire County Council really are the senior partner in the loan, as it were.
Yeah, so it's monitored through their waste credit committee and monitored through the pensions and treasury management.
But again, their waste management, their committees meet in sort of arrears of events. They'll be looking, as we are, at reports from over the past year or 18 months by the time they get them. It's really asking the question, I think, that Councillor Ginman's, are we fleet of foot enough to consider any concerns with interest rate rises, with rapid changes in financial issues, because these are quite significant sums of money, and they are quite significant sums of money, I suppose, and where we're sitting here looking at this thinking, well, the risk's very low, and we've got no concerns, but in reality, we're not looking at the event of today. We're looking at the event of this is the report for 21-22, I guess. And indeed, I remember that I think last year we were looking at 2 years. The report was 2 years old. So any comment that we made was of historical context only. If we're considering risk, it just might be mindful to comment in the recommendation that those officers involved in monitoring consider any risks which may result from national financial movements in financial world, or somebody help me out with some better terminology. But I'm just conscious that it's a sort of loan that can just exist in the back. It goes on for years and years, and it just exists in the background. And it's easy to be complacent about that because there's never been any concern about it. I'm sure Worcestershire will be vigilant, but you ought to at least just raise that small flag that we would wish any changes in the bank rate to be considered in frequency at which this area is revisited, I suppose.
And that compliance certificate looks at both historic performance and future cash flows to ensure that there is ability, and there's a standing item on the risk register to cover the risk that the company is not able to make repayments as they fall due.
Right.
And that's monitored through the Treasury Management function of both councils, and the risk is owned by the relevant Section 151 officers.
Insurance then. Councillor Davis. Sorry, Councillor. Sorry, Andrew. Sorry. Beg pardon, Andrew.
Well, Chair, I normally say on this, no news is good news. This is a report to you. But if there was any indication things were changing, I wouldn't hesitate to have a conversation with you and maybe call an urgent meeting this meeting if there were concerns. And of course, the other parts of the council where we have the operational impact with this organisation and with Worcestershire collection and disposal. So we see it through those lenses as well. So I think we're fairly well placed to be alerted to any unusual arrangements or any areas that are concerns. And actually at this moment we're having a much more enhanced conversation because we're in the process of renegotiating and looking at the new arrangements for a possible extension of the contract also on our basis. So there's a lot of active monitoring going on, but part of that is the operational things which don't normally affect this committee. But if there was a problem, you'd be the first to know.
Yeah, I think that all adds to our assurance on this. Any other
Mr. Chair,
questions? Sorry,
I just wanted to ask the question,
Davis.
do we ever pay any of the loans back? Are they always there somehow? And sorry.
Yes, we do. From a treasury management point of view, the loans have an end point. Some of those are quite long, but part of the annual review of treasury management will look at the loan portfolio and the maturity of them. But most of the loans are long term. They're all fixed rate, and so we have that certainty about what we're paying. All but a very small amount of public works loan boards that are borrowing from government, so we have security of the other side of that further management.
So if, for example, we had an amount of money come in, from somewhere, and we wanted to pay all the loans off, is that acceptable, or will that not happen because our lender is expecting X amount of money for lending us the money? Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. So can we make an early repayment of public works loan board? Pre-2010 you could. Treasury were very happy for loans to be repaid early, in fact encouraged councils to do that. Post the financial crash of about 2008-9, they've changed the rules, so we will have to pay a penalty for repaying those loans then. And that's government policy set by the Public Works Loan Board. So, and it's designed to be a rate, penalty rate to discourage us from repaying. So if we were to metaphorically win the lottery tomorrow, we would have to have quite a difficult conversation about do we repay the loans and pay the penalty or investors get there. So not that we buy lottery tickets, but that's the world we're in.
Investments. I look forward to that coming forward in the Treasury management. It is true to say, I think, Andrew, that there is a specific earmark reserve to repay this loan. Is that right?
We hold a waste reserve, which is to cover a number of things. So it's part of the impact of this loan, but also the cost of reprocuring and waste collection and disposal. There's papers coming through CapEx shortly to look at those. And as we change our waste collection arrangements, one of the costs that the council will have to consider how we fund is if we change the bins, for example. So that's the reserve hold itself for a number of.
Thank you. That's probably going into too much waste for this particular committee. If committee's content, can we just read those recommendations again? That the risks the council's joint lender are confirmed as being reasonable and appropriate in regards to the risks typically assumed from long-term senior funders to waste projects in the United Kingdom at best practice banking practice, and that the arrangements of administration of the loan are reviewed and confirmed as satisfactory. Show of hands, thank you. Agenda item 10, just the work programme now. The work programme is shown in the agenda pack, page 57, 58. I think we've got printed copies to help view the item. The corporate risk register item has been moved to the meeting on the 31st of October. I think it will be ready for then, ready for our briefing. The 2021 Auditor's Annual Report, including commentary arrangements to secure value for money, is now expected at the meeting on the 30th of January 2023. I'm presuming that's on request from the auditor.
Indeed, Chair, and there's a letter indeed from the auditor as appendix to this.
And we're looking at a proposal to potential to bring the external audit findings report to the meeting on the 31st of October. That's not confirmed as yet. Yeah, Rachel, if you want to.
Yes, we've made considerable progress with the statutory audit of the 21-22 accounts, and we are hopeful with some small final query to resolve with Grant Thornton that they will be in a position to produce their audit findings to this committee on the 31st of October, with the caveat that there's a national infrastructure asset issue pending. We're waiting for a statutory override from SIPFA, and so our account will not be finalised until we've had direction on the disclosure of that item in the accounts.
Thank you. Councillor Robertson.
Yeah, I just have one question. We've got re-presentation of the Constitution in our October meeting. So are we expecting that? Because I think our earlier conversations were that it probably won't be in a position to come.
No, it won't be in a position to come to you, for resource reasons.
Is there any date on that at all?
No, to be honest, no. We need to solve the resource issue, and I'm not in a position to.
And I think we've developed the action plan.
Yeah.
So I think we need to work through that action plan, which I'll work with
Thank you. So, although we've got the representation of the Constitution appearing in October, it won't happen then. We're not sure when it will happen. If we move it to March, for now, at least it keeps it on the work programme.
Yeah.
And I think that's perhaps the best that we can.
I think it's in the action plan.
It's in the
so I
action
think we
plan.
just need to pick it up through that.
Yeah, okay. That's fine. Any other comment on the work programme? No? In which case, the work programme for audit and governance is agreed, yes. The agenda item 11, date of the next meeting. The next scheduled meeting is to be held on Monday, the 31st of October at 2 p.m. Change of.
Can I give my apologies already, Chairman? I'm afraid I'm away on that date. I don't get back till the 1st of November. Would you like me to arrange for Councillor Stark if he was available?
If he is available, he would be most welcome.
I thought he would.
And I will struggle as well because
I will as well, I'm afraid.
Well, I'm away on holiday, Chair.
Yes,
Apologies, please.
apologies.
Oh, just remove it.
Okay, that's a clean sweep.
Just to look at the risk register there.
Just yourself, Nigel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which won't be followed.
Yeah. Well, can we, if I could leave it to you to see if we provide you some substitutes, otherwise we'll just have to.
I'll try and arrange to see if Councillor Stark is available.
Thank you. In which case, can I ask the live streaming and recording the meeting is ended now?
I can confirm that.